Hello, everyone. Welcome to the weekly show of What is School For? The interview that is inspired by Seth Godin. On this show, I interview leading educators, entrepreneurs, business owners, parents, students, traditional and non-traditional students to come here to discuss, debate, and disrupt education. The goal is to future-proof the next generation. And today I am really excited. And we have a superstar educator join us live, and Erin Gruwell, and on the show to share her journey and how she has transformed so many at-risk children to become published authors, to make positive contributions to our society. And as I was doing research about her, and getting myself prepared for the interview, I told my husband literally like how amazing this woman is. I literally had tears on my eyes watching some of the videos, documentaries. So I feel really honored to have her on the show. For those of you who don't know who is Erin, she is an award-winning educator, TEDx speaker, and her story has been featured in Oprah and Good Morning America, and so many other different places. And there is actually a Hollywood film made about her. I was like, wow, incredible. And Erin is also the founder of Freedom Writers Foundation, where she helps other educators to learn how they can empower their own students to succeed in life. And so much more what she does, and really excited. So we are live on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Periscope, /Twitter, on YouTube, and on Twitch, on quite a few different places. Yes. So let me know in the comment section where you guys are joining us live from, social media wise and geographically speaking. So make sure you stay for the entire interview. Really amazing story. So Erin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Well, I want to start by saying that I'm still very much a teacher, and even though these wonderful things have happened with our story, and we've had incredible opportunities to work on different platforms, my best contribution, I believe, is being a teacher. So even though there was a feature film and a book, my greatest joy is being able to teach one, teach another. And when we are teachers and we empower, there's no finer moment than when the light bulb goes off. That visible light bulb and the twinkle in the eye, and a kid feels like they get it. And that's the one thing that I miss in our virtual classrooms is the actual ability to see the twinkle in real time. So I have to always lean in a little closer in virtual classrooms to make sure that kids are looking and feeling and all the emotions that come with education. So if I lean in, it's just because I want to see the glitter in your eye as well.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I will try not to cry in today's interview, because I feel like your story really touched something in my heart. And I feel really thankful for you for doing what you do. You know, we need more teachers like you for sure. So share with us, you know, you have been a teacher for quite a few decades, and you started your teaching career in a very tough high school environment. And by tough, I mean, you know, you were dealing with, working with students who are struggling with teenage pregnancy, drugs, violence, so many other issues. So share that like kind of context with us so that our live audience can kind of know the journey you have been on.
Absolutely. Well, I want to give some historical context. I think that's important. Yesterday, you know, around the globe, we watched the funeral of John Lewis, the boy from Troy who walked across that bridge, and Selma stood on the steps with Martin Luther King when he said, "I have a dream," and then became a congressman. And while John Lewis was a college student, he helped found a movement called Freedom Writers. And it was these young, aspirational men of color and women and Caucasians, rich and poor, Southerners and Northerners, who came together with the sole intent that we're going to get on a bus, we're going to ride across America, and we're going to challenge segregation and systematic racism. We're going to sit wherever we want to sit. We're going to drink out of any drinking fountain we want to drink out of. We want to go into any bus depot or try to sit at any lunch counter. So the word freedom rider is our namesake. We are the freedom riders. We didn't ride buses, but we are WRITER. And that name, Freedom Rider, came on the heels of this icon. John Lewis told the Freedom Riders and I that he got into good trouble. And prior to us coming together as a family, and prior to us taking this name, Freedom Riders, my students knew trouble, but it wasn't necessarily good. They were kids that were angry. Mm-hmm. They were kids that were coming from low economic homes, parents who had addiction issues. Some of them were involved in gangs, and there was a lot of trauma. Compound that with the 1992 civil unrest and uprising in Los Angeles due to the Rodney King verdict. So for anyone who's seen our feature film, our film starts out with a riot, and that riot really parallels a lot of the protests we've seen recently after the George Floyd killing in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So my students at the time of those protests, those riots, were actually very heavily involved and affected. Mm-hmm. Some of them were the ones who were looting. Some of them were the ones who picked up a Molotov cocktail. Some of them were the ones who were scared for their life because the corner liquor store near their housing project was burning to the ground. So that also caused another layer of trauma. Following that, in a singular year, we had 126 murders in our community. And so a lot of my students, prior to even walking into my class, knew what it felt like to be scared, to be shot at, to have lost a friend or a father to a homicide. And a lot of them had made the comment that they had been to more funerals than birthday parties by the time they were 14 years old. So our story starts there. 9 kids, a city in chaos, homicides on a weekly basis, and kids feeling like they were at the epicenter of a world turned upside down. They didn't like school, they didn't like reading, they didn't like writing, they didn't like each other, and they certainly didn't like me. And so what happened was I had to find a way to understand who they were, really understand that trauma, but give them an avenue to use education to change, use education to give them a voice, and use words, not weapons, to be their greatest legacy.
Wow, what a story, what a story. I love it. I actually have a clip I want to show everyone. So I found this really great documentary, and so it's going to be a short clip, and you'll hear some of the students talking about the classroom back then.
So on that first day of school, I want to explain how truly clueless I was. I was going to wear polka dots, and I was going to wear pearls. I had this little leather Coach attaché case for my syllabus. I went to my classroom, and I looked around, and I realized there was no technology, there were no textbooks, and there were no eager students ready to dive in and pick up that syllabus that I had worked on. And so I waited. The tardy bell rang, and in came my students.
I moved to Long Beach when I was 12, and life got really real, really fast. My father left, my brother went to jail, my mom was sick, my best friend died.
My parents, I think they were forced to marry. My mom was pregnant at 13 and had us at 14. All I remember was a lot of arguing, a lot of fighting, and it was very violent. I came to this country when I was 8 years old. And right after we crossed the border, my mom told me that I wasn't going to see my dad again. I was living with my mom and her friend and 2 other friends in a garage.
We were just so done with education. By the time we got to 9th grade, I never thought I would graduate at all. If your teacher thinks you're a stupid little Mexican kid, then why are you gonna, bust your ass to try to get good grades for them,
And then in walked this little girl. She was so defiant. She had an ankle monitor. She had a probation officer. She had a father who was in a maximum security prison. And I found out that she had just been released from juvenile hall a few days before school started.
When I was 5 years old, I witnessed my cousin get shot 5 times in the back. It wasn't a rival gang. There was police officers. So I always had this sense of like, there's the justice for other people and there's the justice for us.
I was scared of Maria.
So that's gonna, I highly recommend everyone finish watching this. And I'm going to share the link in the comment section. This is a documentary I was watching, literally crying. So I want to ask you, Erin, were you actually ever scared?
I was scared every moment of every day. And I think that's a good motivating factor. And I say that literally. I think that educators, a lot of us are empaths, and we feel and feel deeply. And when the stakes are so high and you desperately want people to have compassion and take those lessons that you're trying to espouse on them and actually incorporate them, it's scary. So I was scared because the stakes were high, but I was also scared physically. This was a community at that time that was still healing, a community that still had the smoldering ash from a riot and the funeral processional every weekend after there was a casualty from a homicide. So a lot of my students, they called it packing heat. They came to school as a defense mechanism with a gun, a switchblade, not because they were violent people, but to get from point A to point B every day. Some of these kids took 3 or 4 buses, and to get from that housing project to a bus stop, to get from that bus stop to a bus that went through a rival gang territory, to go to another bus. I mean, it just to get to school was a journey. It could take an hour to 2 hours just to get to my classroom. And then in this classroom was a pressure cooker of all of these different ethnicities who were convinced, because there was so much baked in racism in their community, that those stereotypes and those stigmas made them feel as if they were enemies. Mm-hmm. So if I wanted to teach reading and writing and communication, I really had to teach life first, to understand, who are you? Where's this pain coming from? To justify that pain, but to really validate it, that what you have gone through is so difficult. I also had the city of Long Beach at one point had the largest refugee population of Cambodian refugees who had fled from the genocide and Pol Pot's regime. So I also had all of these students who were Cambodian, who were reeling from this horrific genocide that was rampant, that their parents had endured. A lot of my Cambodian students were born in refugee camps. So there was that alienation and deep-rooted poverty of rebuilding. So I think for me that I was scared because I didn't want the violence to continue. I was scared because I didn't want the racism to continue. I was scared once I had to take students home. We did a lot of field trips as our story evolved, and the fear of going to their home meant that I had to enter into a housing situation that was a housing community, oftentimes that we call a housing project. That was dangerous and scary. And what was really deeply saddening for me then was I could drive away. I could go back to my safe community. But my students had to go to a home where they heard helicopters at night, where they heard shots ringing out in the night. So that was a really terrifying thing, but our story has continued to evolve. And it still scares me in a beautiful way, because we gravitate to areas where there's trauma. So we spend a lot of time in juvenile halls and jail. We spend a lot of time in war-torn countries. And that has taught me great sensitivity. When we go to a juvenile hall, there's guards and there's a warden, but they're still kids. If you've gone to war-torn areas, there may be machine guns and soldiers, but they're still kids. So what I've really learned is being scared keeps me on my toes, but it has heightened my sense of sensitivity, that a kid is a kid is a kid. They still need to be loved on. They still need to be listened to. And there's a lot that I can learn as a teacher from them as storytellers.
Wow. I love this. I love this. So this is kind of a relevant follow-up question from our friend in India, and asking, I love this philosophy, this approach, really build that connection with our students and getting to know them. But how can we build this type of culture in other schools, in other countries, in other cultures? So do you mind answering that?
Sure. And it's an amazing question. So thank you for joining us from India. I think the most important thing that I learned was education had to be real, it had to be relevant, and there had to be a relationship. And so initially, even though my students felt like, you're different than us, you look different, you talk different, you live in a different city altogether, I wanted to show that we are much more similar than are different. So a lot of those initial activities I did was making things feel very tangible and of the moment. Making it feel very relevant when they weren't actually in my classroom, and it was no longer an assignment, but it was relevant to their everyday lives. And then also building those relationships. So the Freedom Writers have a saying that we are the family that we chose, the family that we made. We weren't biological brothers and sisters, and I'm certainly not their mom. But for a lot of them that came from fractured families, they desperately needed something that made them feel safe. And so my classroom became this very safe place. This was a hate-free zone. This was an insult-free zone. This was a place that we were gonna laugh like kids, because some of my students didn't have childhoods where there was humor and laughter and celebrations. So all of those things became really important in that classroom to be able to have emotions that we could actually share. And when you have these really big, strong boys who are culturally taught not to show emotion, to have this facade, to be able to cry in my presence in a classroom with others watching was a game changer, because suddenly they didn't have to pretend to be something they weren't. They could show their true, authentic self. I think that could be done anywhere, in any classroom, in any city, any country, and any continent, as long as we are real, as long as we are relevant, and as long as we prioritize relationships.
Well, I love the 3R. I love the 3R. Yeah, I love it. Thank you. So are you saying that, I'm also curious, how do you make yourself relatable to students? Are you kind of saying that you make yourself vulnerable, sharing things, like opening up your own emotions? Is that kind of what you do? Because I remember in the documentary, quite a few students almost also commented on your skin, like race, you look so different from us. So how do you build that relationship, given that you are so different from them?
That's a great question. I think what I learned really early on was very different than what I was taught at a university. The university, it's all about structure and boundaries and don't show your emotion and it's all about the curriculum. So I went in loving literature. I love stories, and I love what we call the literary canon. So I knew what I was supposed to teach. I just didn't know enough about those I was going to teach. And I think what was really important before I taught poetry and Shakespeare, I had to understand the poetry of the streets. So there was a comment that one of my students made. He said, "Why do we have to read books written by dead white guys in tights?" And he was, referring to either Shakespeare or Homer and that Iliad, stories that are written from people that didn't look like him or talk like him or even come from a country that he could identify on a map. So what I realized is they're familiar with stories and the music they listen to, the television shows they watch, the movie and Marvel characters. So I have to understand what feels relevant to them. And it was a great example of kind of, for me, an aha moment. As an English teacher, there was a beautiful poem, and the singular line was, "A rose is a rose is a rose." It didn't really resonate with my students. But at the time, there was this famous rap aficionado by the name of Tupac. And he had written a singular line, "A rose in concrete." And the imagery of that rose in concrete was actually the imagery of himself, a metaphor of, I'm that tough street kid in this urban jungle, but I'm still that rose that's peeking out through the cracks. And I loved how complex that metaphor was from somebody that they could hear on the radio, somebody they could listen to with earphones. And so when I started comparing the poetry that I needed to teach them versus the poetry they already knew, there was this bridge. There was this aha moment that, like, she's doing her homework. She's trying to find out about this icon or this actor or this athlete to speak to us in the same way that I wanted them to be elevated to know about this author or this Pulitzer Prize winning writer. I wanted them to realize I too am studying, and I'm studying you. I'm studying the things that you run to, because pop culture is such a draw. In this age of instant gratification, kids want the answers immediately. And so unlike us, when we were kids, we had a few channels, we had record players, we had now everything is instantaneous. You can change that song, you can change that channel, you can find an answer on Google immediately. And so their attention span is really, really short. So I had to learn, how am I fast? How can I speak to what they know? How can I pivot in real time if I'm not connecting? And I didn't learn that the spontaneity and that flexibility in the university. I learned that on the job. I learned that it's like guerrilla tactics. You gotta respond immediately. And when things don't work, which they won't, and they don't, you have to be humble enough to admit it, to change and do it differently. So I felt like every single day was a learning list. Every single day I had to try something different. Every single day I cried the entire way home. Every single day I thought, oh, that didn't work. What do I do differently and how do I make it better?
I love this. I love this. You are showing the true spirit of being a good teacher, right? That resilience. I'm not going to give up. I also love how you are making such an effort to connect with the students where they are. I feel like I didn't learn that from my university, training. And we come to the classroom as this sage on the stage, right? Our life, we know everything, and we kind of look down upon our students. And I learned it is very important to actually understand their life from where they are. So I love that. And and here's a follow-up question. And so we are talking about kind of emotion and love, connecting with the students. I love this question. Do you think there should be like trainings and webinars to educate other teachers and educators to value emotions and as opposed to, academic performance only?
Oh my gosh, that is the world in which the Freedom Writers and I now live, is how do we connect with teachers to make them more empathic, to make them more compassionate? So we started something we call the Freedom Writer Teacher Program. And originally it was just out of necessity. We had this book, this beautiful book that we had written, the Freedom Writers and myself. And we found that the teachers were going to teach it. And it was scary, like, oh my gosh, we wrote it as an assignment and in our class, and then it's going to be out in the world, translated into all these different languages. How can we help them teach? Because as a teacher, I was always finding the teacher's guide to this story or to this book or this movie. So we thought, well, let's make it a teacher's guide for the book that we wrote. And that was originally how we started. But we realized it wasn't just the actual writing process. It was, how do we teach others to do what we did better and faster and more effectively? So we created all of these lesson plans that I had done that were trial and error. They were not perfect, but they somehow worked. And you can see it in the feature film with Hilary Swank. There's this activity of us playing this thing we call the line game, of just getting them out of the shadows, standing on a line. We did a toast for change with sparkling apple cider, non-alcoholic apple juice. And we did all of these things that allowed my students to be seen, to be heard, and to matter. And what I realized is, for a lot of teachers, as you said, teachers are taught to be the sage on the stage. And I wanted to be the guide on the side. I wanted to be the one that said, in a Socratic situation, how can they become the teacher? How can they take over? And so what I do now is exactly that. How do we teach teachers to feel deeply so, to be flexible, to pivot? When the pandemic happened specifically, we started creating curriculum. And the idea with that curriculum was 100% social, emotionally based, dealing with mental health. And we did it out of fear and necessity and ambiguity, not knowing when are we going to go back into a classroom. And we made it for free. And we just said, okay, who wants to download it? Who wants to try it? And it was based on videos, like the video you just showed from our documentary. So we thought, we'll interview a freedom writer, we'll take a beautiful scene from the feature film, we'll take something from our documentary, we'll take beautiful podcast interviews, and we'll offer them to people based thematically on the themes that are really heavy on our hearts now, of feeling hopeless. So let's celebrate hope, or feeling that you want to give up, so we'll focus on perseverance. And we put it out in the world, and about 60 different countries downloaded it for free. And we were like, what? We were just kind of doing it for ourselves. We thought, if we can have the ability to give hope to one another and model what perseverance looks like, then we'll be better off. We had no idea that it would be out in the world for free and people would want to use it. So I think where I live now in the virtual space is trying to help teachers hold our students a little closer when they are far away, to give this sacred space that is a classroom without walls the ability to still have the connection, the relationship. And so I hope that as teachers continue to teach, that our universities make our teacher training much more relevant, much more thoughtful, not theoretical, but practical. I'm a pragmatist. I believe in making things easier and better.
Amen. I the same. Oh my God. Now as I think about, I taught in the classroom for 10 plus years. Now I think about all the trainings I did. I never learned, emotional intelligence. I feel like this is so important, right? How to handling emotion. Like we never learned that. Everything is very theoretical. And so I love how you mentioned that, right? And because we have to learn some like actionable tips so we can help implement in the classroom and we can see some immediate changes. And we're talking about emotion. And I know that you have quite a few books. And one of this book, which is a New York best-selling book. And I love this book. I love the title, Teach with Your Heart. And just like reading the title already touches my heart. So I want you to kind of explain to us what do you mean by, teaching with our heart, and like why is this so important?
That's a great question. Well, I think that one of the things I tried to do then, and I still try to do now, is give a voice to the voiceless. And I say that in earnest, that in the perfect society, I believe that education is an equalizer, that education could change the trajectory of anyone's life. If you were born into poverty, an education can give you an experience to transcend. If you experienced great trauma, an education can allow you to heal and be whole. So I love, in its truest sense, that education can repair the world. Unfortunately, when you put economics and politics and all that other stuff with education, we often have seen how education can also separate and segregate. Going back to John Lewis, this amazing freedom writer, congressman, moral compass to so many of us. When he was born and raised all those years ago, because of Jim Crow laws, because of segregation in America, there was separate and not equal. And that is a horrible thing that education can do, that says you have to go to this school because of the color of your skin, or you have to go to this school because of how much money your parents make, or you have to go to this school because of your zip code. As we have evolved and are evolving, my hope is that our schools will be more inclusive. But when I began to teach, unfortunately, the school that I taught at was very segregated, which is amazing. And I had studied apartheid in South Africa. I had studied Brown versus Board of Education that said that separate is never equal. This is a Supreme Court mandate. So how is it in America that schools were still segregated? Were they segregated by choice? Were they segregated by geography? Were they segregated by race? So I think what I learned very early on is that I had to understand segregation and stigmas and stereotypes, all of these ugly things that are uncomfortable to talk about. And we had to talk about them. We had to talk about them head on in a safe place in order to understand, in order to heal, in order to go forward, in order to do something about it. So going back to my namesake, John Lewis, one of the things that he said that I believe so wholeheartedly, he said that we've got to get into good trouble. And what he meant by that, by getting into good trouble, is that you stand up, you speak up, and you speak out. So when you see injustice anywhere, it is an injustice everywhere. That if a law says that schools need to be integrated, that schools are not supposed to be segregated, and you see it, you have to call it out. If you see it in a classroom. And that is a very scary thing, because that's exactly what we did. And people did not embrace us. Writing our book, telling our story, I got death threats. I had the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, come after me. Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. I had teachers who used our books be threatened to be fired. And that to me is crazy, that the KKK would want to suppress and burn our book, that we would get death threats for having what we called courageous conversations. And And I didn't realize when we started that sometimes change is not so easy. You're going to get alienated. It's going to be dangerous. But if you get into good trouble, enough people can start saying this is wrong. And how do we write that? And this is not fair. So how do we have justice? And so our story about being from the heart is always following that instinct. You know, our heart tells us what is right and wrong. So we've got to use our intuition. We've got to be able to have agency and the ability to stand up for those that don't have the ability to stand up for themselves. And I think that's what teachers do so beautifully. We stand up for those that we teach.
So true. And I love how you mentioned, you know, with like being very courageous. And I like compared to you, what I did was like little teeny tiny. But even what I did was I got teachers, my friends in education. I was bullied, and yeah, so I can really resonate. And like, you know, like then you really have to speak up and stand up for yourself. You know, stand for change. I love it. I love this.
Can I say something to you? I mean this in the most beautiful of compliments. I think that there doesn't have to be a scale of someone taught 1,000 students or someone taught one. We met Holocaust survivors, and in the Talmud, a Holocaust survivor said to my students this beautiful, simplistic proverb, and it is, "Whoso saves a life saves the world entire." So you have to be comfortable, and it doesn't matter how long you taught, how many people you taught, that if you touched a singular soul, one person, you save the world entire. And I think that you need to realize that today you are very much the teacher on this platform. You know, I'm your student today. And so you get to continue teaching and reaching and making a difference. And so I think you never have to ever quantify that I only taught this amount of years or I didn't make as much of it. You did, and you do, and you are. That's really important for me to say to you, that you are.
That is so beautiful. Oh my God. Thanks for sharing that, Erin. Yeah, so I love this comment from Pam. And she also said she met you in person. I don't know if you still remember her. She's based in California. Teaching with your heart means to teach to a human being. You know, you mentioned that earlier, you know, building, prioritizing relationship as opposed to treating them as like a data point. So I love that. So there was a question apparently earlier related to introvert. I think I missed the question. Oh, here. And so like, how about, you know, working with the students who are very introverted, and how do you build, like you mentioned earlier, you know, connections, authentic connections? How do you connect with them, like people who are very introverted?
That's a great question. I love to assign and delegate really important things to my students so they feel like I'm wanted. A lot of my introverted students were amazing artists. So I would come up with the metaphor of the day, give them blank sheets of paper and a marker, and they had to draw the perfect, you know, the perfect picture that I would then use and Xerox and give to everyone. Or they had to come in and they would pass out the papers, or they would do something that I would say, I can't do without you. I need you. I'm so overwhelmed. Or can you help me, research this? For a lot of introverts, school is terrifying because they don't want to be put on the spot. If you have a learning disability, that is terrifying. So if you're an introvert and have a learning disability, imagine being called out. That could be horrifying, because it's playing on all of your insecurities. So what I was really sensitive to is making the classroom, everyone had a role. Everyone had something to contribute. The beauty of being an English teacher is the writing. And so when everybody had the ability to write, and I would also give them the ability to have anonymity, to stay anonymous, because some people don't want their story shared. But sometimes they could read someone else's story. They could collect the story. So I thought it was really important to understand every kind of learner. There is no one size fits all. There's auditory learners, there's visual learners, there are kinesthetic learners, there are intrapersonal learners. So I just always wanted to make sure that my class was dynamic enough that the kinds of learners that I had could see or hear or experience or do whatever I was doing and still feel a part of it, but not be left behind if they felt shy, if they were introverted, if they weren't ready to raise their hand and ask that question. I still wanted to give them really substantive roles to feel like they had a place and a responsibility in my classroom.
Yeah. Actually, talking about intro, such a sweet comment for you, Erin. And last week, I actually interviewed someone who is he told us on the live streaming show on a scale from 1 to 10, and 1 being extremely introverted, his scale number 2, very introverted, and he shared he struggled so much as a student, like social anxiety, just like you mentioned, being afraid, oh my God, my teacher's going to call me out. Mm-hmm. So I love, what you just shared. So yeah, definitely, yeah.
And I felt the irony with being introverted, I feel that in this new virtual reality, my insecurity was really in this technological space. I'm much more comfortable standing in a classroom. And when the pandemic hit, there's always been a joke at our Freedom Writer office. I have the most brilliant colleagues, much smarter than me. Many of my colleagues are original Freedom Writers. But the joke in our office is that, like, if someone's going to have a baby, you baby-proof the house. You cover up the light sockets and you cover up the sharp edges. In a sense, my office has been baby-proof from me. They don't trust me to do anything. They don't want me to be in charge of the Zoom. They don't want me to be in charge of Skype. They don't want me to touch anything, because if I touch something, it'll just disappear. That is a hard pill to swallow when everything now relies on technology. So in those first few days, feeling very helpless and out of control was something that I had to admit to my colleagues, like, I need help. This is really scary for me. This is so out of my comfort zone. And I think for teachers, we have to be okay saying that this is not my strength, or this is not my my strong suit, or this is not even my personality trait, because being online is very intimidating for me. I don't even like the sound of my own voice. So even being on a podcast, makes me so nervous, because I think that my voice is annoying and scratchy and breathy and raspy. So everything that is terrifying to me is my new reality. And so I think when you just own it, when you're just accountable and you can just be honest and transparent, I think people appreciate it, that you can say, I too am still learning. I am forced to be a lifelong learner, that I haven't mastered this yet.
Yeah. I love how you mentioned that. This is something that I share with my own students, with my own children. I haven't mastered this yet, right? Life is a lifelong learning journey. And just listening to you talk reminds me of this. And many of you probably saw this before. And now this is COVID, but talks about, so maybe this one is more accurate, from the comfort zone to fear zone to learning zone. And eventually, I feel like this is something that even when I started, talking to the camera, like launching this show, I definitely went through this journey myself, right? Like being a lifelong learner. So thanks for sharing that, Erin, being so vulnerable.
Thank you.
Yeah, and earlier you mentioned this toast for change. I love it. And when I was watching the documentary, and I got also emotional when I saw the drinks and the students' reflection. So can you share with us what you did for this toast for change?
It's a great question. So when my students were resistant to do their homework, resistant to read. What I wanted to do is to give them the ability to start over, you know, in a judge-free zone, in a hate-free zone. You know, a lot of them feel that I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough. Look at my grades from before. Look at the classes I took before. So they came into my class very fearful that there was a label. And to compound the label was also the words that they had heard from people who had power and authority. You're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You're dumb. You're stupid. You're nothing. The fact that someone with power would say that to a student is devastating. But they would use those loaded words, dumb, stupid, or nothing. So the idea for the Toast for Change was, how do we wipe the slate clean and start over? Starting today, starting now. How do we put something in the universe and then actualize it? That we can be a bit bigger and bolder and better. And the idea for the Toast for Change was for my students to really say, I'm smart, or I don't want to be like my father, or I don't want to make the mistakes of my brother, or I don't want to make the mistakes that I used to make. It was this ability for them to pick up this plastic champagne glass, make a toast. All of us heard it. And then by hearing it, we could keep each other accountable. And it has become this kind of signature of everything that we've done since is making a toast for change. We actually just started a hashtag Toast for Change, where we asked educators across the globe and original freedom writers to do just that. You know, take any glass and any liquid of your choice and say it and post it on our website, and we'll celebrate. And it was really beautiful to get, you know, all of these great Toast for Change from all of these different locations. Trésor Rusesabagina, who is from Rwanda, making that Toast for Change, or Precious, who was a teacher in Florida, or Nick, who is a teacher in New York. It was so exciting for all of these educators to say, you know, you asked your students to do it, but now we're going to do it as educators as well. We too want to make a toast, and that toast could be to being a better teacher, to being a better listener, to getting out of our comfort zone, to not treat kids as if there's a one size fits all. So it was really exciting for me, and that just happened this last week. We did this celebratory online Toast for Change, and as these videos have come in and continue to come in, it's been such a celebration to see people just toasting. So if anybody's watching, I encourage you to do the same. Pick up
love this. I'm totally going to do this myself.
And you'll live on our website. It's been really fun to see.
It's like this on Twitter. You know, if I do a hashtag search or Instagram.
Hashtag Toast for Change, as simple as can be, and it's been such a celebration of our profession. And when I say profession, it could be a teacher, can be a parent.
No, I was about to say that, you know, right now with COVID, everyone, I feel like parents also need to, everything you mentioned, be a good listener, be a lifelong learner, right? Be a good facilitator. And I think parents also need to join this movement, you know, Toast for Change. What a better parent that we want to be, you know, how we are envisioning ourselves. I love that. I can't wait to check it out. And my students are definitely going to join this Toast for Change. I love it. So what are some transformations? You know, you show up as this very different teacher. You totally believed in your students. You empowered them. And what are some transformations that you observed in those, you know, at-risk children? So share some of those transformations with us.
Well, I love how they went from being at risk to at hope. They didn't believe.
Oh my God. I really try not to cry. I just love it. Yeah.
So some of the beautiful things that have happened and it is a journey, and the journey in and of itself is the destination. Because we realize it's not a sprint. It's more like the casual marathon. You know, we'll get there when we get there. But one of the most celebratory stories that we are still experiencing, we wrote the original Freedom Writers Diary years ago, and we just celebrated our 20th anniversary. So on our 20th anniversary, we got back together and we wrote 20 new stories for the 20th anniversary, and we included it with the original stories. In the 20th anniversary of the Freedom Writers Diary, Freedom Writers really wanted to end with a happy story, the ultimate feel-good story, and it's an education story. So the young woman who wrote the story is someone who came to our country as a baby and was undocumented. Her father left his country to seek a better life and did everything he could for his wife and his children to provide that. A beautiful story, but there was, heartache and all that insecurity of when you don't have documentation, when they call you illegal and all these horrible names. This student, her name is Norma, knew that education was going to be the key. So she raised her hand. She took every extra class. She volunteered for every club. She got straight A's. She fell in love with science and math, and she wanted to be a doctor. And it was right before my students graduated. And there was this horrible awakening that I can't go to college. I'm not a citizen. I'm not legal. I don't have the ability because of documentation. And she lost all hope. She thought the system was a lie. She thought that education had let her down. And it was devastating because up until that point, she'd done everything right. So the story that she wrote in our 20th anniversary was figuring out a way to get those papers, to become a citizen, to go to college. And she is studying to be a doctor.
Uh-huh.
And the reason she wants to be a doctor is because it was something that her family never had the ability to do. And as a kid, she would go to clinics and she realized that people treat me differently and they push us aside and they treat us differently because of the color of our skin or the way we speak or how much money we have or don't have. And so she wants to be the kind of doctor, and she will be the kind of doctor that accepts everyone. And she will fix and she will patch and she will repair. And I just love that that is one of our stories, is that it's never too late to pursue your dream. It's never too late to become who you want to become. It's never too late to take the pain of our past and make it be our passion, to make it be our purpose. And that's exactly what Norma did. And so I love that that's how our book now ends. I just gave away the ending. But I love that. I needed, because I'm shamelessly optimistic, to believe in a happy ending. It wasn't easy and it wasn't simple, but she's doing it. And that's really, I think, our story, is that life is not easy. It's tough and it's
but it's so true. And so recently I have been having lots of conversations with parents, and it is so sad. I feel like some parents, when their children are like struggling with whatever they're dealing with, they just give their children medication, right? And then that really hurt me, because I have had conversations with people like you who literally transformed those children from being labeled at risk to what you mentioned, at hope, because I believe children can change. And oftentimes we're only looking at the behavioral manifestation of a deeper issue, and we try to only, kill the surface, but without looking at the deeper side. I wish, and also recently some of my friends, and they know some other friends, and unfortunately like some young people, just like very young, 16, 18, 20, just ended their lives. That's why I feel like stories like what you just shared with us can literally not only change, but also save lives. And so really, really powerful. Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think now more than ever, there's so much ambiguity about situations. There's so much darkness. And I think that teachers are the light. What I've really encouraged a lot of the teachers I work with is in the midst of this crisis, go find your kids. If they don't show up online, go find them. If they turn off their camera, tell them you need to see their face, that we still need to be alone together. We don't have to be alone, even though we might feel alone. That's all about those connections. And I think that when Norma pulled away from us, she felt very alone because she was ashamed, and she thought, I've worked so hard and everyone else is out pursuing their dreams. It wasn't until she reconnected with us that she realized, like, oh my God, if I would have just shared my pain, if I would have just shared my story, that my Freedom Rider family would have said, we're going to help you, and we're going to cheer for you, and we're here for you. So I think it's really important for all of us in this virtual reality to continue to reach out, to continue to see and be the light for people who are in the darkness.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Yeah. So I know, oh my God, almost 1 hour. I can't believe it. I'm enjoying our conversation so much. So I think here's a question from Pam. I actually have a similar question, kind of talking about the future. I think with COVID has definitely accelerated and resulted in some positive changes in education. So what do you think about alternative education, and like homeschooling has grown in popularity? So what do you think about alternative self-directed learning and different like schools and yeah, so what is your take on that?
That's a great question. I do believe that there is no one size fits all. I think that that's the beauty of our citizenry, is that we're all different. We come in different shapes and sizes and colors and hues, and have different personalities and circumstances. So I think it's hard for some kids to feel like they are a square peg in a round hole. So that being said, I think that we've got to allow kids to find what works for them. I was a classroom teacher in public schools, but public schools don't work for everyone. I do love the civil rights of what public schools stand for, because it's supposed to help everyone, the most vulnerable among us. But they don't work for everybody. And so I think that what we're going to find, especially since COVID-19, is that things have to shift. Sometimes classes were too large. Sometimes schools were too scary. Sometimes they were too rigorous or not rigorous enough. That over the next few months, it's going to be a real time of adapting and changing and finding, if there is a self-directed alternative program online, finding the one that works for that kid. If it's doing hybrid models where some kids go, a couple days at school and a couple days at home, perfecting that hybrid. I feel that we're in a really interesting time right now as a society, because we need to educate our kids. We just don't know what that's going to look like going forward. So I think that unbelievable changes are going to come from this. I feel that education will become more focused on the social, emotional element and the mental health element, because that's what's being neglected right now in this time of isolation. So I hope we don't forget that or forego that. I think that's a very important element of those in which we serve. But I am just an advocate of education for education's sake. So however, wherever, and whenever someone can learn, I just hope they do. I hope they find what speaks to them, and through what speaks to them, that allows them to have great autonomy, great agency, and also great independence.
Oh, my God, what a great way to end the show. So share with us, where can people learn more about you and connect with Freedom Writers Foundation? I have been sharing them on the screen. You guys, here's the Facebook page, but yeah, share with us.
Well, we are very approachable. So our website is the freedomwritersfoundation.org. So you can go to our website if you want to do a virtual toast for change. You can look at some of the videos that are on our homepage. They're beautiful. Scroll over them. Different faces and geographies and different professions. If you want to read the Freedom Writer's Diary, you could find it in any bookstore or online. So that's really fun if you're a voracious reader. If you like to watch things, I've been told that the Freedom Writers film, Freedom Writers, is trending on Netflix. So there's the feature film that stars the actress Hilary Swank. There's also our documentary, and that is free and available online. You can stream it on PBS, and we wanted to make it free and available online for the most vulnerable, the kids that have a rabbit ear television and don't have the ability to buy Netflix or have that gadget. So I love that our story is told in a lot of different ways. But like I said, there's no way to be educated. There's no way to learn about our story. That you just got to find what's right for you. And we also have a podcast that I'm really proud of.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I get to interview freedom writers and folks that have been part of our story. So that's another element that you could find on our website.
What's the name of the podcast?
Our podcast is called the Freedom Writers Podcast. So everything has our name.
Yeah, you can remember. Yeah, I love it.
And I told you earlier that I'm insecure about my raspy, annoying voice. So I try to give my guests the ability to do all the talking because they've got great things to share and great things to say.
I love it. I love it. And I love what Lance mentioned. It is 3 a.m. his time in Australia. So thank you for joining us live. Applies to adult education as well. I think so. Also parent education. I feel like what you shared can be applied across different countries, different industries, different settings. Really universal. I love it. Very, very powerful. So thank you so much again, Erin. Totally made my day. And I can't wait to watch the documentary actually with my own children. And I think parents should do the same. Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us live on a Friday or Saturday for some of you. Really appreciate your time. And I hope to see you again next Friday or Saturday, the same time, same location. We have another amazing person to come on the show. So thank you so much, everyone. Bye.